Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host, Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. This week we're going to talk about plaster repair, and we'd like to thank Brandon Busey for liking and sharing the podcast. Plaster has been used for thousands of years to cover surfaces in buildings, and the ancient Egyptians used plaster inside the pyramids, and some of the plaster is over 4,000 years old, and it's still in good shape.
Wow.
Egyptians used reeds as lath and applied plaster over the reeds to create a finished surface.
Cool.
Yeah.
What is plaster?
It's a building material used to make walls and ceilings. Some of the first plaster was made out of clay, sand, and straw. In the 1800s, lime, water, and sand were used with animal hair as the binder. In the 1930s, gypsum became the main ingredient in American plaster.
What is plaster of Paris made of?
So it's a gypsum-based plaster. It gets its name from a very large and very pure gypsum deposit near Paris. And historians say that there's evidence of gypsum quarries as early as 500 AD in the Paris area.
What is lath?
So it's the material that you're putting your plaster onto. A common lath in older homes is wood strips about 1 inch wide, 1/4 inch thick, and 4 feet long, which are nailed to joists or studs, and there's usually about a 1/4 inch gap between each strip of wood. Metal lath is a mesh that's attached to studs and joists, and in newer construction, blue board is used to cover the joists and studs, just like drywall, and it has a special surface that will hold plaster, and this is called veneer plastering because it's just a thin coat of plaster over the blue board.
How thick is regular plaster?
Traditional plaster was put on in 2 or 3 coats, and a common thickness is 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch thick, but it can vary in its thickness.
How thick is drywall?
Walls are usually 1/2 inch drywall, and ceilings are 5/8 inch drywall.
How does the plaster stick to the lath?
For a 3-coat plaster ceiling or wall on wood lath, the first coat was troweled onto the lath and forced into those spaces between the lath so it would fold over behind the lath, and that would harden and lock it onto the lath. The plaster that folds over the back of the lath is called the key or keys, Keys. The first coat was then scored with a tool or scratched so the second coat would grip it better. The second coat was usually called a brown coat because many mixtures use sand and cement, and it was brown in color. And then the top or finish coat was usually a mixture with lime to create a very smooth, hard finish.
Wow. How long do you think it took them to figure this out?
Yeah, really.
How many walls just fell?
Yeah, how many ceilings came down first?
So one of the most important parts of the plaster wall or ceiling is the keys?
Right. The problem with plaster is it can pull away from the lath if the keys break off. If your house is settling, it can put pressure on the keys and crack them. If you're by a busy street, the vibration can crack the keys over time. And if you're not controlling temperature and humidity in your home, it can put stress on the plaster. For ceilings, if there's a lot of movement on the second floor, or if you're working in the attic and walking on the joists, you can crack the keys and loosen up the plaster.
Bummer.
Yeah.
What are the most common types of repairs you would make in plaster?
So you're generally going to have cracks, areas that are bulging out, or sections of the plaster that are crumbling.
Let's cover how to repair a crack first.
So the first thing, if you have a crack, you want to push against the area where the crack is to find out if that section of the plaster has separated from the lath. If the area is solid, it's pretty easy just to fill cracks with caulk or drywall compound. Use a putty knife and scrape over the cracks to remove any loose material, and then take a painter's caulk or acrylic latex caulk and a caulk gun and fill the cracks.
Can you use a squeezy tube?
Or a squeezy tube. You can use a putty knife or your finger to smooth the caulk to the surface. If the surface has a texture, you can use your finger or a tool to blend it or shape it. Then you're going to allow it to dry, prime it, and paint it. So pretty easy with small hairline cracks.
Uh-huh.
If there's a slight movement in the area when you're pushing against the wall or the ceiling, but it feels pretty solid, you can drive drywall screws along the crack about an inch away on each side, and that's going to secure the plaster to the lath.
Okay.
And if you miss the lath, just remove the screw, move it over, and put in another screw.
All right.
For cracks that are a little wider, you can use a utility knife with a sharp blade or a painter's 5-in-1 tool and use the sharp edge to open up the crack and remove any loose material. Now you can use a setting type compound and fiberglass mesh tape to repair the crack, just like you would with drywall.
Okay.
And if you're using screws for small cracks, you would dimple those slightly below the surface and cover those with like a joint compound.
Okay.
USG, the United States Gypsum Corporation, recommends a setting type joint compound to repair cracks and holes in plaster. It gets very hard and it will help hold the plaster together.
So this isn't a ready mixed joint compound, right?
Right. This is a powder you would add water to. It hardens from a chemical reaction like plaster, and it dries very quickly, where a pre-mixed joint compound dries slower because you're waiting for the water to evaporate, and that usually takes overnight.
Right.
There's a product for cracks called Plaster Magic. It's Plaster, capital Magic. Their kit comes with an adhesive in a caulk tube, a conditioner in a spray bottle, and plaster washers with drywall screws. You drill holes through the plaster on each side of your crack with a masonry bit, and what's nice about this is the masonry bit will go through the plaster, but it stops at the lath. You're going to vacuum out the holes that you've created. You're going to spray in this conditioner. You're going to shoot the adhesive into the holes, and then you're going to tighten the plaster against the lath with these plaster washers. And that way the adhesive is going to bond to the back of your plaster and to the lath. Once the adhesive cures, you're going to remove the washers. You're going to fill the holes with drywall compound. And now that whole section is going to be secure.
What are plaster washers?
These are cupped washers that are used to hold plaster in place. Most are usually about an inch in diameter.
Okie dokie.
Crack Coat has a repair kit for drywall or plaster cracks, and Crack Coat is KRACK, capital KOTE. The kit comes with a flexible patching compound, a fabric mesh, and a spreader. You would brush the patching compound over the crack, put the mesh over the crack, and use the spreader to embed the mesh and smooth out the compound. Then you're going to brush on a second coat over the mesh. If you have a surface that's textured, you can use a sponge or a texture tool to match the texture.
Cool.
When I was investing in real estate in Chicago, my business partner and I had quite a few homes with plaster walls and ceilings. And in a lot of these old homes, the walls were very solid, but they had hairline cracks or rough surfaces or a lot of imperfections that develop over the years. So we would patch all the cracks and small holes with tape and compound, and then we would put stucco over the plaster to give a uniform look.
Well, to hide your repairs.
Well, yeah, exactly. If you have plaster walls with a lot of imperfections, you can cover the whole wall with a fiberglass mesh fabric and then skim coat it with a joint compound to give you a smooth finish. Red Devil, it's R-E-D, capital D-E-V-I-L, they have a fiberglass mesh crack patch that's 36 inches wide and 75 feet long.
Wow.
And Fiba Tape, it's F-I-B-A, capital T-A-P-E, has a crack stop plaster repair fabric. And this is 36 inches wide by either 75 feet long or 150 feet long. And it's self-adhesive, so you just cover the wall and then skim coat it with joint compound.
Oh, easy enough.
Yeah. There are wall coverings called wall liners or paintable wallpaper for covering surface imperfections on plaster walls. You put it up like wallpaper and then paint it. And they have textured designs so it looks interesting and it covers cracks and surfaces that aren't smooth.
Cool.
For small areas that have pulled away from the lath or they're crumbling or you have a small hole, you can cut away any loose plaster with a utility knife and fill the hole with either setting-type joint compound or patching plaster. You would press against the plaster and cut the opening to where it's solid against the lath. You would clean the hole, vacuum off any dust and debris, and apply a bonding agent to the edge of the old plaster and over the lath. And that way the setting compound or the patching plaster is going to bond well. And knock out any plaster in between the lath. So you want that space open so that your setting compound or your plaster patch gets into that space and holds it in place.
And creates a key.
Exactly. Plaster weld is a bonding agent for plaster, and that's Plaster, capital WELD. And Quikrete concrete bonding adhesive will bond old and new plaster or plaster and compound together, and Quikrete is QUIKRETE. California One Coat Interior Plaster is a gypsum-based patching plaster. It's designed for a one-coat application up to 3/4 of an inch. And it's California One ONE Coat, KOTE. Fancy.
Mm-hmm.
Dap, DAP, has a patching plaster. It's ready mixed for holes and cracks. They recommend widening any cracks to 1/4 inch with a utility knife, scrape off any loose material with a putty knife, and then fill the crack with a compound knife. The knife can be dipped in water to smooth the plaster to the surface. For large or deep cracks or holes, they recommend applying 2 or more layers, letting each layer dry for a few hours. For any repairs that are deeper than 1/4 inch, allow the repair to dry for 24 hours before priming and painting.
Good to know.
Dap Plaster of Paris comes in 4, 8, and 25-pound containers, and this is a powder.
Mm-hmm.
You'd use cold water to mix with the powder. They recommend 2 parts powder to 1 part cold water, and the working time is 6 to 10 minutes.
So you have to work fast.
Right. They recommend cleaning off any loose material first and then undercut the edges of the repair area to help anchor the patch. Use a spray bottle to lightly mist the area with water, and that's going to help it bond and prevent the old plaster from drawing the moisture out of the patch material, which would weaken it.
Okay.
For deep repairs, they recommend applying a base coat that's slightly below the surface. Allow that to dry, then dampen the base layer and apply the finish coat. Allow the finish coat to fully dry before priming and painting.
Cool.
USG Structolite is a gypsum plaster for small or large holes over lath, and Structolite is STRUCTOLITE. This is a powder that mixes with water. They recommend the first coat is forced between the wood lath to form good keys with a minimum 1/2 inch thickness. Once that first coat dries, they recommend covering it with red top gauging plaster, and that's RED, capital TOP. Gauging is GAUGING. Gauging plaster is a special blend that creates a very smooth, hard finish. For walls with large areas of loose or crumbling plaster, use a utility knife and create an opening for a piece of drywall. You can use a few plaster washers to hold the solid areas of the plaster in place while you're cutting out the bad area. Measure the thickness of the plaster and get drywall that's the same thickness or slightly smaller. And you're going to screw it against the studs, then cover the seams with drywall tape and compound. So very similar to repairing a big hole in drywall.
Cool.
And you can put a skim coat of plaster or setting type joint compound over the drywall.
Right.
If you have a ceiling with a lot of loose areas, I would have a contractor who specializes in plaster take a look at it, especially if you've had a roof leak, because large sections could potentially pull away from the lath and break loose, which could be dangerous.
Right.
For sealing cracks or holes, use plaster washers to support the plaster on both sides of the crack or the edge of the hole. One drywall contractor suggests using the tip of a pointed trowel to create a dimple So when you tighten down the washer, it's flush to the surface, so it'll be easy to cover. Or you can use a 1-inch circular Dremel tool or a 1-inch spade bit and just create a dimple deep enough for that washer. And then you're going to cover the crack and washers with wide fiberglass mesh tape.
All right.
When you're mixing setting type compound or plaster products, wear an N95 mask to protect your lungs. If you're scraping or cutting out sections in a ceiling, wear eye protection. If you're in an older home that was built before 1978, there could be lead paint. The CDC recommends wearing a P100 respirator. It will block 99.9% of particles 0.3 microns or larger. To control dust and debris, there's a company called Zipwall. It's ZIP, capital WALL, and they have dust barriers. They have kits with spring-loaded poles that you attach plastic to block off an area, and they have doorway kits that have double-back tape that you put on your door casing and a plastic door with either a zipper or a magnetic seal, so you can go in and out and close the area off.
Nice. Do you have anything else to add?
Plaster walls and ceilings can last hundreds of years, so catch small cracks and repair any loose areas before they become a bigger problem.
Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
You can download our ebooks, Home Improvement Solutions, What Every Homeowner Should Know, books 1 through 16 on Amazon.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and review.
You can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow Cindy on Twitter at FixItCohost. And you can follow us on Instagram, Fix It Home Improvement.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.